What is truth? This is the question that the Roman governor of Judea, Pilate, asked Jesus after the Jewish leaders had arrested him, beaten him, and brought him to Caesar's court to have him condemned and crucified. Pilate begins to question him and ask him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And after some conversation, Jesus finally says, "Yes, I am a king, but it's not of the kingdom that is in direct conflict with Caesar. My kingdom is different. It is in the world, but it is the kingdom of truth. And therefore Jesus has come to testify to the truth." And this is when Pilate asks that age-old question, what is truth? And 2,000 years later, we are still asking that question. What is truth? How do we determine what is true? At one time, we accepted the statements of philosophers and religious leaders as being true because those statements aligned with what we knew about humanity, about our sense of what was happening in the world. These statements seemed to fit. But then we went into a period for 200-300 years where truth ultimately became only what we could scientifically verify. If we could test it and prove it independently, then it was truth. Otherwise, it was all subjective. It was all open to debate. But now, in the last couple decades, we've even rejected this. Now we've either come to the conclusion that nothing can be proven. We are left in the dark. We are stuck with what is called the philosophy of nihilism, which says everything is hopeless. There's no end. There's nothing to prove. We can't even know the truth. And then the other situation, and maybe worse, I don't know, is that we've come to believe that truth is no longer objective. We can talk about my truth being my truth and your truth being your truth, and that's okay. They're all true, however you want to believe it. If it works for you, it's good. It must be true. And what has this led to? It has led to chaos. Because what happens when your truth conflicts with my truth? We have no way to judge between them because we've rejected any sense of objective truth. C.S. Lewis in 1946 anticipated just such a state of mind. He writes about what he calls the post-Christian view, which he says is gradually coming into existence 77 years ago. It is complete already in some people and still incomplete in others. This is quite different. According to it, nature is not a living thing to be reverenced. It is a kind of machine for us to exploit. There is no objective right or wrong. Each race or class can invent its own code or ideology just as it pleases. As for ideologies, does no one see the catch? If there's no real right or wrong, nothing good or bad in itself, none of these ideologies can be better or worse than another. For a better moral code would mean one which comes nearer to some real or absolute code. Again, 77 years ago, Lewis spoke with this prophetic voice. Each ideology is today creating its own understanding of right and wrong. We've rejected any sense of objective truth, and we laugh at those who argue for it. This leaves us with no way to judge between one value system and another. Whatever we want to believe is the truth, and we have chaos. But this is not the way of Jesus Christ. As Jesus told Pilate, he came to testify to the truth. Not just his personal truth, but the truth of the one who created the entire cosmos. The one who was with God in the beginning. Jesus' emphasis on the truth in his life and ministry is highlighted by the author of the Gospel of John. Jesus' life was a witness to the truth. His teaching emphasized the importance of walking the truth. This same author writes later in one of his epistles, "I have no greater joy than to hear my children are walking in the truth." So my prayer as your pastor is that you would become people who walk in the truth. I, as a servant of Jesus Christ, want to be one who is walking in the truth. And while I hope and I want to assume that we all agree that this is a worthy goal, I want us to be aware that walking the truth will not be as easy as we might think it would be. It won't be as comfortable as we might like it to be. The reason it will be difficult and uncomfortable is because we're not talking about simply assenting to a series of statements. It's not like saying out loud the Apostles' Creed. It's not about keeping a few commandments. To be a person walking in the truth means that we're learning to live in that truth. We become people who embody the truth. The truth must change the way we think, the way we relate, the way we behave. This embodiment of the truth is evident in the life of Jesus. That first chapter of the Gospel of John, I read to you just a few minutes ago, verse 14. It says that Jesus was full of grace and truth. The Word, the creative Word, which was with God in the beginning, became human. Theologically, we know this as the Incarnation. He dwelt among those he created. He possessed the very glory of God and has come from God the Father. And in this, he is abounding, overflowing in grace and truth. I want you to pay attention to these two qualities because they should always go together. They should always be held together, grace and truth. You know, one of the things that those who are conservatives, and I tend to lean to the side of the conservative side, we tend to be very good at holding the truth. We believe in the objective truth, and we believe in the objective truth of Scriptures. In this regard, we don't make the error of the modern pagans that Lewis was talking about. But we tend to make a different error. We do not always recognize that living out the truth requires that we hold this truth with grace. Grace must permeate all of our interactions with others, including those times that we're speaking to others about the truth. Ronald Rolheiser, Catholic priest and writer, said, "We ought to hold the truth with deep compassion that recognizes that people's lives are complex and that truth is not a sledgehammer. It is not enough to just have the truth. Truth can set free, but it can also freeze the hearts still further if it is not presented with the utmost compassion, gentleness, and understanding. Living in the truth means that we hold that truth with compassion, gentleness, and understanding. This is where we're challenged. How often have we, believing that we are right, beat other people over the head with the truth? In light of this, at the very least, our love for the person who is lost in error ought to supersede our need to prove that we are right. You know, the reality is people are not won over by proofs. They're won over by love. People are transformed by love and by grace. This is why Paul says in the book of Ephesians that we ought to live our lives speaking the truth in love. Literally, the way this phrase, it is truthing love, living truth in love. They must always go together, grace and truth. We must always hold the truth in the right spirit. When we do this, as Rolheiser says, then we come to chapter 8 where Jesus says, the truth will set you free. When grace and truth are held together, it becomes, instead of freezing, freeing. The reason truth freezes us is we so often live in an atmosphere of condemnation and rejection. People become defensive. Walls go up. It's happened with me. You know, I became a pastor, and then God began to reveal some things in my life that weren't what I wanted to be. I was struggling with fear and with self-centeredness, and I didn't want that to be true of me. And for a long time, I resisted the truth of it because I was afraid of the rejection. I'm a pastor. I should know better than that. But when I began to experience the fact that God loved me unconditionally, that I was his child, I was bathed in the grace and love of God, it became freeing so I could look at these other spots in my life that needed to be freed of those things. And I could do it because I knew I wouldn't be condemned. How often do people fear to look at the truth because if they find it, somebody's going to condemn them for it? The truth became freeing for me and for everyone else when it is bathed in the truth and the grace of God's love and forgiveness. God's grace, love, and forgiveness is essential to our finding freedom in the truth. When we know that love and grace and truth go together, we can put aside our false selves. We can stop pretending to be who we're not. We can live in the truth of the freedom of who we are and work to transform that, to work to change it. As I've said, if we're not bathed in that, it becomes easy for us to deny the truth. It becomes easy for us to reject it outright because we feel condemned. Freedom comes when we live in the truth, bathed in grace. Moving on to chapter 14 of the Gospel of John, Jesus tells us, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Here's one of those I am statements, those statements that declare and reflect upon that passage in the passage in Exodus where God reveals himself to Moses as, I am that I am, the great I am. And now Jesus repeatedly in the book of John will be described as the I am. And here I am the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus not only embodies the truth, he exemplifies in his life how we ought to live the truth. So he's the way. He shows us how to walk in the truth. He embodies the truth. And when we walk in the way and when we embody the truth, then the truth becomes not only freeing, but life-giving. I am the life, Jesus says. The way, the truth, and that brings life. And not only for ourselves, but others. When we walk in the truth, we find life, we find freedom, and we find life. And then we become agents of life to others. With all that said, we have to understand that this is a difficult journey. It's more than just knowing a bunch of facts. It's about how we apply those things to our daily lives. Our calling is to live out, to embody the truth. But for us to do that, it's essential that we have God's Spirit guiding and directing us. That indwelling Spirit which Jesus gives to us when our faith comes is essential to learning to live the truth. Because we need His Spirit to guide us into each of these situations. We have to examine what grace and truth looks like in each particular situation. I'm not talking about situational ethics, but the reality is each situation requires a different way to approach the truth, a different way to confront or explain or give the truth to another person. In my work as a counselor, I had one young man who grew up in an unashamedly racist family. They were white supremacists, and they did not like anybody of any different social, racial, ethnic group. To be quite honest, his views, which he had taken from his family, offended me. I wanted to take him directly and say, you got to see life differently, young man. But I knew that he was the kind of person that would become very defensive and the walls would go up and he would never talk to me again if I did that. So instead, I tried to approach the truth in a different way. He would ask me questions about my relationships with people of different races, and I would talk about my friendships, and I would talk about the goodness of those people, and I would try to confront him gently with the truth in an indirect way. Now, there are other kids I've worked with, not just about that issue, but other issues where I've directly confronted them on issues because I knew the relationship. I knew how they would receive it. I knew that they understood that I cared for them and that they could hear the words and know that I would not reject them. We need to be able to present the truth in different ways at different times, depending upon the situation. We don't change the truth, but how we offer it to the person, that's where we need the Holy Spirit to guide us, because we can't see it alone. The truth will never change, but how we present it may and does and should. But there's another way that varies, and reason we need the Spirit to guide us, because at times truths come into conflict. For example, the Ten Commandments tell us not to lie. But how many believers were prompted to lie to protect the Jews from the Nazis in the 1940s? How about Rahab, who lied to protect the spies for the love of her family and for the protection of these men? And God honored that lie. So sometimes one priority, say love, takes precedent over another truth. You know, the rabbis used to have arguments about which was the greatest commandment. The reason they did that was to determine which one would be followed if they came into conflict, because they recognized they would. This is what happens when the lawyer comes to Jesus and says, which is the greatest commandment? He is asking Jesus to tell him which one takes priority over all of the others. And Jesus says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the priorities. So again, love becomes the priority. Truth is to be held, but it's to be held in love. That's why holding to the truth is difficult. Not impossible, but not as easy as just saying, I'm right, you're wrong. Or this is the truth, believe it. It's a more complicated, more intricate, and that's why we need God's Spirit to guide us into the truth. Over the next year, I want to explore issues about the truth. This is my theme. I want to look at evidence which points us towards God's reality. We will look at what are called signals of transcendence, those things that say there's something more out there. Pay attention to them. The truth is they are there and we need to pay attention. We'll look then at another calling. During Lent, we will look at the calling to some very uncomfortable things about what God asks us to do. To be dependent, to be submissive, to be vulnerable, to become servants. These will be uncomfortable truths to face and to live out. Later in the year, we'll look at the new things that came as a result of Jesus' resurrection. What did it bring and new? And we'll look at the qualities of the church. What's true about the nature of the church? In all of these discussions, we need to always hold the truth that we discover with grace. Grace for others and grace for ourselves. Sometimes the walls go up and we have trouble giving grace to others as well as ourselves. I want as a church for us to commit to be on an honest search for the truth. And beyond that, to learn to live the truth as we know it at this time. It's not going to be easily achieved. The search for the truth will be challenging, uncomfortable, disconcerting, and troubling. You might ask why. Because if we listen carefully with open minds, we will find at times that we've not been living the truth in the past. That what we thought was the truth was not so. Often the truth will challenge our treasured ideas, our preconceived notions, our preconceptions about the truth. At times the truth will be unexpected and maybe even unwanted. It will certainly challenge our way of thinking and living. But today, as we commit this year, I want us to learn to be people who, like the author John says, are people who are walking in the truth. Amen.